Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar on emotional intelligence in times of crisis. So I'm Gwyneth, and I am just going to, if you're okay, wait a couple more minutes because I've had something like 20 people sign up to say they're coming. So I'll just maybe wait 1 or 2 more minutes to see who joins us, and then we'll get started. All right. Great. Okay, so before we get started, I would love it if you'd all type in the chat box just a quick introduction to who you are. So maybe you can say, where you are at the moment, what brought you to this webinar tonight, and what's maybe one thing that you'd like to get out of this today. And you can type that while we wait to see if a couple more people join us. Okay, great. So we've got a couple of you in Prague. Yeah, I mean, that's where I am as well. So no surprise that the majority of people, but we've got someone in Nepal. That's amazing. All right, great. So we've got a psychotherapist in here as well. Cool. Well, welcome. We'll start. I mean, a lot of people signed up. Oh, yes, we've got 2 more people who just appeared suddenly. Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay, great. For those of you who just joined, if you type in the chat where you are right now, what brought you here tonight, what you're interested in learning, you can see we've already got a few different locations. Well, 2 different locations right now. We'll see if we have more. Okay, well, I'm going to get started, and anyone who joins us after will just get to catch up. All right, perfect. So let me just start with a real quick introduction to who I am. So I'm Gwyneth Jones. I'm a coach. I focus on emotional intelligence, on also positive psychology. And my main aim really is helping people to cope and transition with difficult times, especially climate change is my main focus, but the whole coronavirus situation is, I think, very similar in terms of the uncertainty, the feelings of helplessness and, not knowing what's going to happen. So this webinar is obviously, applicable to all sorts of crisis situations, but with the whole COVID-19 situation in our minds as the main thing that we've got, right? Probably all of us are thinking about. Wow, we have someone else from Kathmandu. Okay, cool. I have a wide international reach for this event. Nice. So I'm here in Prague. I'm from Wales originally, and I've been in Prague for about 5 years. And yeah, like probably everyone else, I've been in lockdown for about 5-6 weeks. But at least for me, that means I've been able to focus on what I'm doing, on my coaching, and really spread that out there. So that's been really great. So yeah, let's start. So what we're going to look at today is briefly what is emotional intelligence. Now, some of you probably know more about that than others, so I won't go into it like for too long. We'll assume some basic knowledge, but we're going to look specifically at fear, sadness, anger, maybe other emotions that are quite relevant right now. And we'll go into a bit of biology, really, how your body responds to threat, so you can understand that fight or flight or freeze mechanism a little bit more. And then we'll talk about the importance of recognizing how we're feeling, and the importance of being kind to yourself and accepting uncertainty. And then we'll also look at how you can generate what I've called useful emotions in the body. I say that because it's important to distinguish between what's a pleasant emotion and what's actually useful, right? So we'll talk about that more in a moment. So I want to start with a grounding little meditation, a grounding breath. So I'd invite all of you to close your eyes and sit comfortably, or wherever you are. If you're on a chair, on a bed, if you're lying on the floor, whatever, just get yourself comfortable for a moment and close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. And as you do that, notice your feet. So if they're touching the floor, feel how the ground is supporting them. Notice how your chair, your bed or floor is supporting your body. Just focus for a few seconds on that space where your body connects to the rest of the room. Now just focus on the feeling of your breath, especially on how your belly expands as you breathe in. And if it doesn't, try to breathe in really deeply there so you can feel your belly expand as you breathe in and contract as you breathe out. And just focus on that for a moment. And I invite you to just notice any sensations you're feeling right now in your body. Could be any discomfort or pain, any particular sensations that pop up anywhere. Just notice them, acknowledge them. Don't think of them as good or bad, just something that's there. And then you can expand your awareness for a moment to the sounds you hear. So just notice any sounds that you can hear around you. In the room, outside of the room, on the street. Just notice each thing that you can hear and kind of catalog them to yourself. Okay, now come back. Notice the feelings in your body again. Focus on that breath, your belly expanding and contracting. The feeling of your body, your feet being supported by the ground, by the chair or bed. And just say to yourself, right now, I'm safe. Right now, I am safe. Okay, and when you're ready, open your eyes and we can come back. Okay, so hopefully that's brought us a little bit more into the room. And what I really like about that little grounding breath is it takes 3 minutes. You can do it while you're at work. You can go to the toilet and just do that if you're feeling stressed or you know that you're not able to focus on something. And yeah, so let's move forward. So we'll start with a really basic question, which is what are emotions? And then how many emotions can you list? So I want to just give you a few minutes to type into the chat box. Firstly, we'll just look at what are emotions. I know it seems like a really obvious question, but if you imagine that an alien from outer space came to Earth and asked you, what are emotions? What would you say to them? So take a few minutes just to type in the chat box, what would you say? Feelings? Okay, but the alien will ask, what are they? What is a feeling? An inner voice, okay. What else? Let's see if we get a couple more answers. Okay, emotions cause you to move your behavior in a certain way. Experience states of thought, chemical reactions. Okay, yeah. So we've got a few different answers here. Okay, now before we go into maybe defining emotions, I want you to see how many emotions you can list. So don't type them all into the chat. If you have a piece of paper or if you have notepad, something on your computer or a piece of paper, I'm going to challenge you to write down as many emotions as you can name. Now, if English is not your first language, do it in your language, do it in any language you want, because you're not going to show me. The question is just how many you can name. So I'm going to set this timer for 2 minutes and see how many you can write down by yourself. Okay? All right. So I'll give you another second to find a pen or open something on your computer where you can type. All right, and go. One more minute. Okay, and stop. Right, so I just want you to type in the chat box, how many emotions were you able to list in 2 minutes? Thank you. Okay. We've got some actual ones here, or numbers 18, 18, 17, 29. Wow, okay. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay, yeah, pretty good. So I think Anadela is the current winner. Obviously, I'm not checking them, so you could have said anything, but that's all right. So the reason I asked you to try that is because one of the first steps to emotional intelligence is, being able to name and distinguish between as many emotions as possible. So somebody who, just has good or bad as their emotional vocabulary, they're not going to be as emotionally intelligent as somebody who can tell you, am I feeling not just happy, but maybe excited, inquisitive, curious, serene. The greater your emotional vocabulary, the more you'll be able to notice the tiny differences between these different moods. Now, of course, the question is, are these all separate things in the brain? Is there a different, reaction for joy versus, extreme happiness? Is there a different reaction for annoyed and furious? And it's hard to say because traditionally people always believed that there was that, humans could distinguish between 6 main emotions. You might have heard that, oh yeah, universally people can recognize these emotions, but more recent research now is coming out suggesting maybe not. Maybe everyone experiences their emotions slightly differently in their brain. And when we scan people's brains and say, oh, okay, this is what anger looks like, it's actually an average of what all the different brain scans look like, which means it's not identical. It's that we're all experiencing slightly different mixes of chemicals in our heads, and we just learn a name to give to those chemical reactions. So I'll tell you more about that in a bit because it's a bit of a more recent theory. But yeah, we've said what are emotions. So firstly, let's look at the Latin etymology. So emotion apparently comes from this Latin word motere, which comes from, motor, and to move. And the e at the end, I believe, means to move away. So what that means is, emotions, that chemical reaction, they're an impulse to actually act, right? So that makes sense when you think of an animal or a child. When they feel an emotion, you really see them act based on that emotion. So, a dog, if it's scared, you'll see it actually act, right? It'll run away or it'll attack or do something. And the same with children, you'll see their emotional reactions very clearly being acted out. It's just, us adults in the so-called civilized world that have to repress our emotions in order to keep our jobs or fit into society, right? We can't always scream or run away or attack someone when we feel an emotion. We push it down and try to act normal. So yeah, so an impulse to act is where the word actually comes from. So when we ask what are emotions, we could say basically they are chemical reactions in our body designed to produce some sort of action, right? With some kind of result in mind. And we feel them, so we call them feelings, because we feel them obviously in a different way from how we feel, something touching our skin, but we perceive them in some way. So some people say the difference between a feeling and an emotion is just that a feeling lasts for longer. So I can have a sudden emotion, like a sudden rage come over me, then I can say, over a longer period of time, this is this and this feeling of anger. But I think people really use the two words interchangeably, right? And then a mood would be that emotion lasting for a much longer time. So you could say I'm in an angry mood if that emotion has persisted for a longer period of time. So yeah, what I want to start with here is just looking at this emotional versus rational brain. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, there's this idea, right, that we're almost stepping back and we're observing our emotions as if they're this wild thing that we can't really control, this untamed thing. And this analogy is captured pretty well in the elephant and the rider metaphor, which is not mine, it's from Haidt. And the idea is, the rational mind is the rider, and the rider thinks that they're in control of the elephant. They're like, oh, well, I'm driving. The elephant, however, if it gets scared, if it sees something it doesn't like, you're going to find out very quickly that you're not really in control, right? That elephant's going to take you for a wild ride. And so this is one way to think about how we kind of have two brains. We have our thinking mind, the rational mind, the mind that says, oh yeah, I know it's silly to be afraid of this thing. But the emotional mind, impulsive mind, it doesn't care, right? It doesn't care what's logical and rational. It feels what it feels. And balancing those two things is one of the big challenges of being human, I think, right? So some people seem to let their impulsive mind kind of take over the whole show, and their rational mind doesn't really get much of a say. And then other people might try, too hard to let the rational mind be in control, and they ignore the emotional mind completely, or they try to like beat it into submission. Again, doesn't really work all the time. So when I say that we have two brains, what I'm talking about really is different parts of the brain that do different things. So we'll look more at that later on, what that really is, but I just wanted to introduce that now so you know that when I say rational versus emotional brain, what we're talking about. So emotional intelligence is really, we can just say being smart about feelings as a really simple way to explain what it is. So, understanding that emotions are data. And what I mean by that is, even if you're a very rational person, you're someone who likes science, you don't like sort of woo-woo, touchy-feely stuff, you still need to understand that if we ignore emotions, that we're ignoring really valuable data, right? I mean, it's information, chemical information in our bodies, and we might, ignore our, our body telling us that something is wrong. We might ignore it because we've been taught that emotions are childish or something not to be taken seriously. And what happens instead if you go to your job every day for 10 years and you hate it, and your body is reacting as if it's under extreme stress, and you in your rational mind tell it, no, shut up, we have to do this. What are the long-term consequences of that, right? Usually you're going to get sick in some way. It's going to come out in extreme stress or different types of mental illness quite often. And the same goes for, if you're a manager, if you work in an organization and you ignore the data of your employees' emotions, right? That can also mean, people keep leaving the company and you can't work out why. And if you just look at the facts, it doesn't make sense. Like, oh, they have a good salary, they have good benefits. You might be missing some key information, like people feel upset, maybe because a manager is making them feel upset by how they're speaking to them. Maybe they're feeling, unheard, unappreciated. So if you don't tap into what's going on emotionally, you miss half the picture, basically. So emotional intelligence is not just about mastering your own emotions, but just understanding the importance of emotions generally. And yeah, I think this is a nice quote, you know, to look at, is from 6 Seconds, which is where I did my training for coaching. They're the Emotional Intelligence Network. So yeah, so EQ is the capacity to blend thinking and feeling to make optimal decisions, which is key to having a successful relationship with yourself and others. And there's a lot of benefits to emotional intelligence that we can see. So yeah, so the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways. So here are some things that you can do once you start to get better at emotional intelligence, right? To relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. And there are loads and loads of benefits to having high EQ, basically, as you can see here. So better relationships, more success, more health, all the things we want. So at a time like this, you know, when there's so much uncertainty, there's so much disinformation going on in the media, there's, you know, so much stress and maybe isolation, there's all these emotions going on, right? So, you know, having good emotional intelligence can really help everyone at a time like this, I think, to navigate what's happening, because, you know, we can't control what's happening out there, right? I mean, there are small things we can do. We can help to stop the spread of the virus. We can maybe, you know, if we've got some spare money, we can donate something towards a vaccine being produced, maybe, but we can't control ultimately what's going to be the outcome of this. But what we can do is manage our reaction to it. So yeah, so I'm not going to obviously teach you everything about emotional intelligence today because we don't have that much time, but the 3 key parts that I've chosen to look at are recognizing our emotions, understanding where they come from, why they're here, and finding some ways to counter our stress response, so to change our mood, in other words. Okay, so here we have what we can call a stimulus response. Wait, I moved myself from here. So you've got a thing out in the real world, so a mouse in this case, because I didn't want to choose a scary picture, and a response, fear. So what's happening here, right? The question is, how is this thing in the outside world causing this reaction? So firstly, let's ask, how do you know when you feel fear? So how does fear feel in your body? And I want you to type in the chat again. Hope you don't mind all the typing. I like to keep things interactive. So if you type in the chat, what does fear feel like for you? Like, how do you know that you're experiencing fear? Okay, tell me more. Panicking, but what do you feel in your body? Maybe your heart rate increases? Is there some sort of telltale signs in the body that you can notice? So we've got panicking, I react, can't think clearly. So paralysis, heart racing. Maybe some people feel cold, right, when they get fearful, like hands go cold for some people. Sweating. Yes. So we're noticing a few different things. Shaking, sweating. Okay, yeah, this can be common things too. Okay, so there are always physical, let me put my glasses on. There are always physical symptoms, right, that we can notice. And part of EQ is sort of noticing what's happening before we jump to that reaction. And I mean, really, this is a thing that can take years to master, right? It's what Buddhist monks spend years trying to find that like split second between the chemicals starting to do a thing and your reaction, and finding that moment to step in and change the way that you react. But we can start today just by becoming more aware of how things feel in our body. So why do you think we feel fear? What's the purpose? So, if we think back in a sense to our ancestors millions of years ago, why did they develop this reaction, do you think? So again, if you want to type anything in the chat, survival, So tell me more. How did it help them to survive? Yeah, exactly. Because of the big lion. Well, right, exactly. So if you can imagine two people, right, and there's a lion running towards them, one of them gets this reaction of, my heart's racing, I need to run, something is pushing him forward and he's gonna run for it, and the other person doesn't have that reaction at all, which one was more likely to survive and then pass on their genes, right? That's the evolutionary theory about it anyway. So it doesn't always feel that way for us, right? Because sometimes our fear stops us from acting effectively. It can be more of a hindrance than a help sometimes. But, looking at what originally evolved and why. So let's have a look at some other emotions, because, they all have distinctive traces or reactions in the body, and they all have maybe an explanation about why we evolved them. So the next few slides are actually from Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. I just thought they were really, concise, really good. So I wanted to share those with you. So let's have a look. I also, took the Inside Out characters because I think it's a great little movie about emotional intelligence. So anger, they said, right, this causes blood to flow to the hands, making it easier to grasp a weapon or strike a foe. I don't know about you, maybe that's why your hands get sweaty if you feel the blood draining from one part of your body to another. Heart rate increases and a rush of hormones like adrenaline generates a pulse of energy strong enough for vigorous action. So anger, you can feel it, right? You feel the blood like rushing to your face. So that would have been the fight move, really. That would have been when our ancestors got ready to attack something. So, if you've heard of the fight or flight response, the fight is often, when something inside us decides that our best chance of survival is to fight. Now, we feel anger not just when an enemy's in front of us, right? We can feel a lot of other types of anger, but it is normally connected to some feeling of injustice, something is wrong or unfair somehow. So fear, we've talked about. So they've said that blood goes to the large skeletal muscles like the legs, so that's making it easier for us to run away. And then the face blanches, which means it goes white as the blood drains down to the lower half of our body. Also, the body freezes, even if just for a moment, which can give us time to decide whether we should hide or run away. And it also says, this flood of hormones put the body on general alert, making it edgy and ready for action. And also attention fixates on the threat at hand. So one thing connected with fear as well is looking at something with a really fixed gaze focus. And that's one reason, one recommendation for relaxing is actually to try and soften your focus. So that means instead of staring at one thing, like how I'm now staring at my screen, you try to relax so that you can see the things here in your peripheral vision much better. So you kind of blur your eyes. What that tells your brain is that you're safe. Whereas when you look at one thing, it tells your brain that there's danger. And if you really think about how we spend so much time looking at our screens, there is an argument that can cause us to feel more anxiety. And a similar thing is, there's a few studies showing that we don't breathe properly when we're typing. I found myself, we take these short, shallow breaths. We don't take the deep belly breaths. And again, that's sending messages to your brain that there is danger and fear. So it's really interesting. There's some other emotions that you might want to look at, disgust. So, the upper lip curls up like this, the nose wrinkles slightly. So this is thought to be, closing up the nostrils against a bad smell or spitting out a poisonous food. So disgust is really the reaction if we've, taken something in that could poison us. So sadness, I think this one's really important because, a lot of people right now are in isolation. They're feeling a lot of grief, maybe for what's happening in the world. So sadness is thought to help us adjust to a significant loss, such as the death of someone close or a major disappointment. So I'll just read this to you because I think it's really important. Sadness brings a drop in energy and enthusiasm for life's activities, particularly diversions and pleasures. And and it deepens and approaches, as it deepens and approaches depression, it slows the body's metabolism. So that's interesting to write. It slows down our metabolism. This introspective withdrawal creates the opportunity to mourn a loss or a frustrated hope, grasp its consequences for one's life, and as energy returns to plan new beginnings. So this loss of energy may well have kept saddened and vulnerable early humans close to home where they were safer. I think that's really interesting because we often don't see a purpose, for sadness, for feeling grief, and especially our society seems to be very afraid of talking about death or loss, or, even acknowledging feelings that are thought to be unproductive, right? Because sadness is almost one of the least capitalist emotions out there. It stops us from producing and buying and rushing through the rat race. But right now, maybe we're experiencing it quite a lot because, we've lost a lot of things in our day-to-day life. And so it is giving us this space to reflect as well and maybe to grieve, which, can be very important as well. And then we've got the nice fluffy emotions like love and joy. So love is an interesting emotion because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is what activates when you are feeling fear or anger or danger, right? It's the heart rate increasing. But the parasympathetic, the opposite side, this is the one that slows down the heart rate, that tells you that you're safe, that it's time to, rest and generate more energy. It's kind of an emotion that would tell you, this is good, stay here. And that could be one of the reasons we feel happiness and love, in a survival sense. It's telling you, this is good, these people are good, this, environment is fruitful and safe. So it's almost rewarding you for that. So love can help to counter the fight-flight response. I think, really important if you are quarantining alone, that can be very hard not to have that kind of connection with somebody that can trigger the love response. So I'd still say, find a way to have it, even if it's looking at pictures of cute puppies on the internet, something that helps to trigger that response in you. Yeah, so this relaxation response. Facilitating cooperation as well. So it's a very important social emotion, right? So without this kind of love and happiness emotions, we might not be drawn to communities in the same way. So let's see. So that is from Daniel Goleman's book, which is, the recommended place to start if you're going to learn about emotional intelligence. Really recommend it. Okay, so here's the problem, right? We're not living in caves anymore. We're not living in that environment where these emotional responses first developed. So I'll just read that quote to you. Here's the mismatch problem in a nutshell. Modern humans must navigate an anonymous but densely populated, digitally dependent world with a brain started millions of years ago in small hunter-gatherer groups composed of family and friends who roamed sparsely populated open grasslands. There's a book about this as well. So we have to give ourselves, I think, a lot of, firstly, gratitude that our bodies and brains are working hard all the time to keep us alive, right? As far as our emotions are concerned, they're trying to help us survive. The problem is they got their training a really long time ago, and there hasn't been like a software update. They're still operating as if we were living out on the savannah and there was a lion coming to attack us, right? So it's still a very different environment now from what we originally evolved in. So I think we have to be gentle with ourselves as well. We have to recognize this and not feel frustrated that we maybe don't have the exact reactions that we'd like to have. So sorry, just trying to admit one more person into the room. Okay. So we still react the same way, right, to a distressing news article as we would have done to a lion running towards us. That's where we've got to really be kind to ourselves to realize that we're still having those same reactions. So I mentioned before about the rational and the emotional brain. So I just want to give you a little bit of a closer look at what that is, what we're talking about. So yeah, you've probably heard of this three brains idea. Basically, we're looking at the oldest part of our brain. So what they call the reptilian brain. The reason it's called that is because reptiles have this, right? They have this mechanism. It's basically a part of the brain that acts on instinct. So there's no real suggestion that there are emotions or feelings or rational complex thoughts happening. It's just very much like if you burn your hand on something and you move it away very quickly. It's that kind of instant reaction. So that's the oldest part of our brain that evolved. And then a few thousand years later, we evolved this limbic brain. So this can be seen in mammals. And this is really where all of the emotional processing happens. So we'll look more closely at that limbic brain in a moment, like what's going on in there. But this is basically, where we can see the majority of emotional processing happening, right? And then the latest addition to the party is the neocortex. So this evolved much later. And this is where we have, language and rational thinking, right? So it's these different parts of the brain, but of course they work together. They work together in harmony most of the time. So it's not as if we have, different actual brains in there, but I guess it can feel that way sometimes, right? It can feel like we're dealing with multiple characters or personalities going on. So what happens in the limbic brain? So basically the amygdala is one of the famous, can I say, one of the more well-known parts of the brain that deals with emotional regulation. And I think we have a nice explanation here that we can look at actually. So I've mentioned the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system there. And this is basically mediated through the amygdala. So I'll go back. What happens usually is, if you perceive a threat, you'll have that sent to your cerebral cortex from your amygdala, right? You'll be consciously aware that there's a lion running towards you, and you'll have a few split seconds to decide what to do. But that's not always the case. So there are times where, I think we'll got a slide on that later, but there are times when your amygdala basically decides actually, I don't want to waste time sending that to conscious awareness. It's too dangerous. I need to act right now. And this is when, let's jump ahead a second to show you. Yeah, to an amygdala hijacking. This is where Daniel Goleman refers to it as quick and dirty processing. So it basically prioritizes speed over accuracy. So this helps, you know, it can happen a lot, right? That people were in a situation where they were in danger and they don't really remember what happened because the cerebral cortex, the neocortex, wasn't really involved in the decision. The amygdala basically, and this reptilian brain, they worked to keep you safe. They didn't even bother sending it to your conscious awareness, which is kind of scary when you think, you know, wow, maybe I don't always have the control over myself. But we, you know, we have to be aware that this is part of how our brain works. So for some people who've had trauma, this amygdala hijacking can happen a lot more frequently. So, you know, it's quite common if somebody's had a particular type of trauma that anything that reminds their brain of that situation again will cause the amygdala to immediately act. You know, so before they're really consciously aware of what's happening, they find that they're running away or they're fighting somebody. So again, it's a sort of better safe than sorry mechanism where the amygdala is thinking, if I send this to the conscious brain, to the rational brain, there'll be time to think about the reaction, but, you know, I'm just going to react. The problem is it doesn't always work that accurately, right? So it might be that anything that vaguely reminds you of a lion causes that reaction. So, you know, there's a video on YouTube where a guy shaves his dog so it has a sort of lion's mane and releases it into the park. It's kind of funny, but, you know, people see this thing running and something in their brain immediately recognizes the features of the lion and they just freak out, they just panic. So it's not an accurate mechanism necessarily. So this is, you know, something important to recognize in ourselves, that if we're in a crisis situation, we might not always have full conscious control over what's happening because our, you know, limbic system, this sympathetic nervous system, might kick in and just take over. So I think it's really important to understand this fight or flight mechanism, but also, you know, not just in terms of what happens in a really obvious danger situation, right? Because we think about this in terms of somebody's attacking you, there's, you know, a wild animal coming towards you. But how do these reactions show themselves in a more long-term situation? And this is where you might be more surprised, right? So if we're thinking of a situation like a pandemic, something that drags out over a period of time, so where there's, you know, sort of these ups and downs, right, of danger, because one day you might feel like, okay, I'm used to staying at home now, this is normal. Then the next day you open up the news and you see something new that scares you again, and that mechanism, that, you know, fight or flight might kick in again and you panic again. But then by the end of the day, you're still at home, you're still safe, so you might calm down again, you know. So it's this constant up and down, right? We're flooding our body all the time with this kind of stress. And so I found this really interesting. It's kind of adapted from Leslie Davenport's book, which I have right here. It's Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change, that I think very applicable to this pandemic as well. How do these reactions show themselves in a more long-term situation? So you might recognize yourself or others in these reactions, right? So a fight response might look like attacking others on social media, writing angry or outraged posts or blogs, pushing information on others, you know, so really like trying to force other people to see your way of thinking. and berating peers for their bad behavior. And by that I mean, shaming people for going outside, for not washing their hands enough, for whatever it might be. And this is kind of a feature, of the fight or flight responses, that we're much more likely to think in black and white terms. So everything becomes good or bad. There's not much space for nuanced conversation and discussion when we're in that panic mode, which is one of the reasons, right, that things like extremism thrive when people are afraid and they're in that constant stress mode. And of course, actual violence or aggression could happen. And then we've got the flight mode. So this could look like avoidance and denial. Positive illusions, which is when we predict our own future to be far rosier than others. And, this could look like telling ourselves that somehow we're going to be completely fine in the situation, even though everyone else is going to suffer. Or, somehow our entire circle of loved ones will be unaffected. Could be bargaining and rationalizing our own behavior. So, this could look like going out, meeting some friends, but telling ourselves, well, it's okay because I follow these procedures and they had been socially distancing. And, we find a way to justify because we don't really want to face maybe the reality of what's happening. And at the same time, we might also berate other people for their behavior, right? So this double think can go on. And the freeze mechanism as well. So freeze, that's another reaction to stress where we just don't run or fight, we just completely freeze. And this could look like just completely disconnecting, dissociating, numbing. So, we might spend all our time maybe, playing online games instead of looking at the news, like refusing to pay attention, procrastinating, or, in a situation like climate change or this, we can just get stuck in what can I do? Will it make a difference? So, we get stuck rather than looking at different options. We just go round and round in circles. So, yeah, does anyone recognize any of these reactions in themselves when it comes to the current situation? Feel free to write that in the chat if you feel that you can relate to any of these. Of course, these are not the only reactions, right? These are just some. You might think of some other ones as well. Take a breath for a moment. My emotional intelligence, I notice I speak too fast and then I feel I get out of breath. So we've talked about the amygdala hijacking. So back to this, stimulus and response, right? So we talked about how something in the physical world, in the real world, might cause a reaction. So we might see a lion or a spider and feel afraid. But what about when it's something a little bit different, like a news story? What is happening? Because obviously a screen is not actually dangerous to us, right? So what's happening in the middle is there's some sort of thoughts happening, right? There's some process that translates what's on our screen into a danger, so into a perceived danger. Yeah, so I've talked about this, how sometimes things skip our neocortex, so the amygdala hijacking. Yeah, and another reason this can happen is our hippocampus recognizes a threat based on previous experiences. So what could be some of the thoughts that would translate this news story here into this response, right? So probably there's a whole story happening here in the thoughts that leads to the fear, right? And of course, the fear probably won't look like this. It might look like this, but inside you, there's a whole lot of stuff happening. So let's have an example. So the stimulus could be reading a news story. about someone who's lost their job, the thought process then happens something like, oh my gosh, the economy is going to hell, there's going to be a recession, I'll lose my job and I'll become homeless, I'll starve to death, everything will go Mad Max and I'll have to fight with my bare hands to stay alive. What's the thought like that going to do to your body? Yeah, so obviously stress, overwhelm, anxiety, fight or freeze. So, a lot of emotional intelligence is recognizing not just how am I feeling right now, but why? What was the trigger? All right. So, was it something out there in the real world, or was it something that I thought? Yeah. And I think it's important to remember too, like we said, emotion comes from that motor, to move. And if we're not moving, if we're just sitting at our laptops and staring at terrible news stories, what is happening? Because everything in our body is telling us that we need to move, right? To fight or flight, to run away. But if we don't do that, what actually happens? So I'll just share this little thing with you from Harvard. So this tells us that after the initial surge of epinephrine, which is another word for adrenaline, okay, it's the same thing, subsides, the hypothalamus activates the second component of the stress response system. So there's a part two. So if we read forward, basically this relies on a series of hormonal signals to keep the sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, we can imagine, pressed down. So it's like revving your car, right? You're keeping the gas pedal pressed down. You're not hitting the brakes. A lot of people struggle to put a brake on stress. So it's this constant, like low level stress happening in the background. And so that long-term exposure to stress can lead to a lot of health problems as well. So, okay, so somebody has to leave. Thank you for joining us, Denisa. I hope you'll catch the rest on the recording. And yeah, Ruben's asked, how do we differentiate, from a good response to a bad? Yeah, perfect question. This is what I really want to cover, but I'll sort of say now, this is what we need to think about, right? Is we've looked at what are the purposes of our emotions. So by recognizing that fear and anger and sadness, they're not bad emotions, right, that we need to get rid of. They're useful emotions that evolved for a purpose. And so the question is, how is this emotion serving me right now, right? Is this anger helping me? Because sometimes the anger can help motivate you, right? If you're an activist and you're fighting for social justice, then the anger can help to motivate you, to move you forward. The fear can maybe help you sometimes to, get away quickly. But the question is this emotion helping me right now? What is it doing for me right now? Yeah, the goal is not to always feel happy, because that would be weird, socially inappropriate, and it wouldn't keep you alive very long, right? If you were in a dangerous situation and you were just like, everything is beautiful. So it's always just looking at, when is the emotion serving you? When is the emotion useful? And that's the separation. And that's what I really emphasize when I coach people as well, is, a lot of our society is a bit afraid of negative feelings. It's afraid of uncomfortable feelings. Like I said before, right? We're afraid of talking about death. We're afraid of feeling bad. And I think this is why, we've ignored a lot of problems like climate change, maybe why politicians didn't take the coronavirus threat seriously in the beginning. People don't like to feel bad. We push it away. And then you get all these positive psychologists sort of sounding as if the goal is to always be happy. But that's also, it's not sustainable, it's not realistic. So emotional intelligence is really understanding, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling this? What is the purpose of this emotion in general? And then what, is it serving me? And if not, what emotion would serve me better? So let me just give you some sort of more actionable things that we can work with. So yeah, I asked you in the beginning, how many emotions can you name? And can you explain the difference? So we had different numbers, right? We had someone got 29, some 17, 18. So this is the first step to boosting your emotional intelligence, really, is developing your emotional vocabulary. So Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's the writer of How The Secret Life of the Brain, How Emotions Are Made. So this is actually the book I mentioned before with the newer research that suggests that we don't have like one place in the brain for anger, one place for fear, one place for joy. You know, it's all a different cocktail of chemicals, and it's a little bit different in each person. When I feel fear, it might feel different from when you feel fear. We can't know, right? We can't ever really be another person. We can just compare our experiences and, assume they're roughly similar. It's the same way you can never really know if the blue I see is the same as the blue you see. But it doesn't really matter either, as long as we're using those words to refer to the same thing. So she says emotional granularity. So emotional literacy basically is one of the things most linked to emotional intelligence. So that means, instead of looking at colors and saying red, yellow, blue, green, you look at all those fine colors. So instead of just red, you might see scarlet, burgundy, crimson, all these different shades. And to give you a starting point, here is some examples of emotions. So have a look at that wheel. See how many of those you'd be able to really explain to somebody, And maybe you could think about some of those emotions, like how does that feel in my body? So I recommend that you have a look at the wheel of emotions. You can Google that and find something like this. And that's one task for you. Have a look at it, look at all those emotions and ask yourself, how does that emotion feel in my body? And maybe when's the last time I felt that? So the next part after recognizing emotions are looking at, what are the triggers that cause certain emotions within you, right? So we said in the beginning we had the stimulus response. So it could be as simple as a mouse makes us scared. It could also be, this story on my newsfeed. It reminds me of a time in my past where I was really sick, and that makes me really scared because I don't want to be sick again. It can be, for example, when my friend doesn't reply to my messages, I start to tell myself a story that she doesn't want to be my friend anymore. That makes me feel fear again because, it could again be connected to some past experience, right? Or just the fear part of my brain is telling me that that means, oh, this friend doesn't like you anymore. And that can be scary for us in a survival sense again, right? Because not having a tribe or a community would have been very dangerous for our ancestors. So when you start to think about this, to look at what what causes emotions in you, just remember that our emotions are often not rational. So this is why it's so important to be kind to yourself, because you look at something and you realize, okay, when my boss doesn't like my idea, I feel angry or I feel really upset. It might be that you then feel annoyed at yourself, like, oh, how can I be so weak? How can I be so irrational? But remember, they're not supposed to be rational, right? This is a survival response from the oldest part of our brain. So they're designed to keep you safe. So they're not designed to be rational. So, I almost try to think of it as a guard dog that just gets really excited whenever someone comes to the door. It doesn't understand. If you try to explain to the dog rationally, like, this is just the postman, it doesn't understand. But it's trying to keep you safe, just like these emotions. I think we've got to try to be kind to ourselves, right? Because otherwise there's just more internal conflict inside us if we're then annoyed with ourselves for having these reactions. And again, remember, our brain uses shortcuts to decide if something's safe or not. So it's kind of like an algorithm trying to, have the most fast reaction, not the most accurate reaction a lot of the time. And another important thing to remember is emotions are contagious, right? So right now, this is really relevant because if we see other people panicking, this sends a signal to our brain that it's time to panic. That's why spending a lot of time on social media right now can make us feel really stressed, because we're seeing all this anger and fear and stress from people in our communities. And that can tell our brain, like, oh, well, if they're panicking, it's time to panic. And the opposite's true as well, right? There are these studies that show, for example, the smoke-filled room is a great example of a study that shows that if something is obviously wrong, but nobody else in the room is panicking, then we usually don't panic either. So this experiment had people sitting in a waiting room for the experiment to begin, not realizing this was the experiment, and smoke started to come under the door into the room. So when the person was alone waiting, they usually worried and they started to, knock on the door, try to find out what was happening because they were afraid. But with different people, when they had actors in the room who pretended to be completely unaffected by it, so they would keep reading or look, like it was no big deal. And even if the person asked them, hey, there's some smoke under the door, they'd go, oh yeah, I'm sure it's fine. So I think 9 out of 10 people then also ignored the smoke because we're like, oh, other people are not worried, so it must be okay. And that gives you another little hint about how we've managed not to panic about climate change, right? Because it's like, oh, well, other people seem fine, so this must be fine, right? But meanwhile, when we see people panicking, that can cause us to panic. And remember, we react based on perceived, not actual danger. So again, how actually dangerous something is doesn't matter to the emotional brain, right? It's why we might be more afraid of sharks than elephants, even though statistically elephants kill far more people a year than sharks. Fun fact of the day. Again, things that kill us more than COVID-19, there are a lot of things that statistically are much more likely to kill us, but this is new. Everyone's talking about it. There's like constant stories about it. We don't know exactly what it is, so it's unknown, it's spreading quickly. So there's all these things that make it much, much scarier than heart disease, which kills most people in the Western world every year, right? So just I would invite you to try and write down something like, when this happens, I feel this. And you might not know right now, but next time you feel a strong reaction in yourself, maybe write that down so you can start to recognize what patterns come up for you. And another thing just to briefly touch on is, humans love to feel that they're in control of situations, even if we're not. There's studies showing that when we feel that we're in control of something, we're much happier. So that can be, when people gamble, they convince themselves that they have like magic powers to control the outcome of the dice roll, lucky things that we wear. And here's a list of things that can be explained by our need to feel in control, right? So hoarding, like refusing to get rid of things, superstitions, perfectionism, anxiety, obsessively reading every news story and statistic to stay informed, because we might feel out of control if we don't know everything. Posting onto social media because we try to feel that we can control and influence other people's behavior. Excessive cleanliness. And then, you know, if we finally accept maybe that we can't change things, we might feel depression and helplessness. So obviously there's a need for balance here as well, right? We, you know, control might make us feel better, but imagining we have control over loads of things that we don't can also lead to some unhealthy behaviors. So what can we do to balance that is the question. Well, I'd invite you to think about, you know, what has life taught you about what is within your control? And I mean that because we have actually some people from Nepal in here and some people from Prague, so we might have a very different balance. For some of you, you might have been told everything is karma or God or destiny, right? Like you can't control it, just accept it. But then in the West, we are taught like everything is in your control. You know, if you have money, if you have a good job, if you're happy, everything is in your control. And this can also be very destructive because we can then blame ourselves if our life isn't perfect, even though, you know, a lot of the outcome can be because of luck or good connections or social privilege. But, you know, the level that we were taught growing up that we could control will also influence how much control we need now. So in a pandemic, again, you know, if you were taught that everything is in your control, this can be a very stressful time for you because, you know, the lack of control can be really overwhelming. Yeah. So, you know, I invite us in this sense to look at, are we preparing or are we panicking? What is actually within your control? And this is a little worksheet that I'd invite you to try. You know, maybe I would give you just 2 minutes to write down these 3 things onto a piece of paper. And then after the call, you can try to go through this on your own. So it's what you're worried about right now and what you're worried might happen in the future. And this is an important distinction, right? Because right now, maybe everything's fine. Maybe most of your worries are things that could happen or might happen in the future. Right now, if you're here on this webinar, you're probably quite safe or safe enough to tune into an online webinar. So I imagine most of these worries will be future things. And then, you know, when you have this list of things you're worried, I'd also suggest that you maybe give them a probability. So how likely is this actually to happen, right? Because I might be worried that I will be eaten by a shark in the future. But again, the statistical chance of this happening is very, very low. So try to recognize how likely are these things to happen. And then here next to them, possible solutions or concrete steps you can take. So what I mean is, even if you can't do anything to stop the spread of COVID, is there some tiny step you can take? You know, even if it's just you wash your hands more or you stay in more, is there something you can do? And for those things that we really can't control, this is where the things I'm about to show you might help. So ways that we can access moods that are going to serve us more powerfully. Okay. So I call this generating more helpful emotions instead of feeling positive, because as we said, sometimes the helpful emotions don't feel nice, right? Maybe anger is helpful sometimes, but it doesn't always feel nice. Maybe sadness is helpful sometimes, you know, maybe we need to grieve sometimes, or we need to feel anxiety sometimes to motivate us, right? So it's looking at what emotion do we want to generate. Yeah, so as I've said, depends on if it's the right thing to do, but calling more useful parts of us into action. So, yeah, I would say there's a small meditation exercise that we can do right now to practice calling a more helpful emotion into being. But I will do that with you in a minute because I just see we have 15 minutes. So I'll give you the other tips I've got first, and we'll see how much time we've got at the end. If you're happy to stay on maybe 5 minutes later, just let me know if you have to go. So the other things I wanted to say was, we've looked at how emotions are really physical, right? The physical sensations in the body, the chemical reactions. And from my research into emotional intelligence, it really is bodily intelligence is what we're really talking about. So being aware of how we're feeling right now, it requires us to be in touch with our body a lot more. And this is another problem of modern society, that we kind of live in our head, right? We're just here, we're always looking at our screen, and we're not really paying attention to what's happening in our bodies. So looking after our body can be one way to help connect more with how we're feeling. So, if you exercise, the more you exercise, the more you'll become aware of how you're actually feeling. But also, what Lisa Feldman Barrett writes as well is, the more you look after your body, the more you'll be able to manage your emotions. And she calls this your body budget, which I like. So it's kind of like, if your body doesn't have the right energy it needs to manage emotions properly, then you're not gonna maybe be able to manage your emotions as well. So if you're not sleeping properly, for example, or if you're having a lot of caffeine and fats and sugar, it can cause these energy spikes and crashes, right? So you have low energy, you have a coffee with lots of sugar, so your energy spikes quickly, but then that means it crashes as well much faster as well. So managing the sort of physical aspect of our lives, it's like the classic advice: sleep, eat healthy, do exercise. But that's what science says, even for managing our emotions well. Also the importance of natural light and greenery. So if you have some nature you can go to, that's great. If not, try to at least get some natural light through the window. I even just stand at my window and let the sun come onto my face for a while. It's just, if I can't go outside, having plants or flowers in your house, if you can, even. Lisa Feldman Barrett even recommends doing things like, sometimes escaping into a novel or knitting, doing something with your hands. All of these things can help you actually manage your emotions better in the long term. Also, we can't, say enough about the power of being there for others. So we said how that love response triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, so helps you to kind of calm down and put the brakes on the fight or flight response. And when we give to others, or when we think about what we're grateful for, that can help to trigger that love response as well. Gratitude, this can be listing 3 things that you're grateful for, thinking of a person in your life that you're really grateful for, and kind of writing a letter to them. You don't have to send it, but just to help you think about what makes you feel that gratitude. So it's important that we maintain social connections and have face-to-face, like camera-based conversations as much as possible. So touch, it's very important again for our body budget, to keep us able to manage our emotions better. And if we don't have someone in our lives right now that we can touch, sounds a bit weird, but even again, they say even just like stroking your own arm like this, like giving yourself this affection, or your head like this can help generate the same kind of oxytocin in your body that makes you feel that love response as well. So meditation and mindfulness. Yeah. And then the final thing, I just added this because 6 Seconds, the Emotional Intelligence Network that I am with, they always talk about the importance of understanding your why. So actually asking yourself, why do you want to have different emotions? Why do you want to be more emotionally intelligent, you know? And for me, that might be, oh, well, because I want to have better connections with people, because I want to be, you know, show up in the world more effectively and make the world a better place, or whatever your reason is. So kind of recognizing why as well is an important thing. So let's just go through that meditation if you'd like. It's just a very quick visualization for bringing the emotions you want to feel into action. So is everyone okay to stay maybe 5 minutes beyond the time? Just let me know if you have to leave. But this will just be a 5-minute meditation. Okay, so close your eyes again. And I want you to think of an emotion that you might like to call into action at a certain time. So that could be strength, resilience, could be calm or peace, joy, love, whatever it is. So I want you to close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths again. Think back to the last time you remember feeling that emotion. Could be recently, could be years ago. So when was the last time you felt that feeling that you want to feel again? So imagine everything you can remember about that. So where you were, try to picture the room or the place that you were in. Really, you know, remember who was there, what was there, what were you wearing, where were you sitting, what smells and tastes and sounds were going on in the room. Maybe tastes if you were eating something. Try to recall that scene as vividly as you can. And as you do that, move your body into a position that would, you know, represent that feeling. So how were you sitting or standing at that moment? You know, were you standing up tall and strong, feeling resilient? Were you relaxed back with your shoulders back? So try to adopt that pose and really try to remember how that emotion felt in your body at that time. So still keeping that pose, keeping that emotion. Come back into the room and open your eyes. Now, if you're still holding that emotion that you have, think of a situation recently that's been difficult for you and ask yourself, how would I handle that right now, feeling like this? And a little extra thing that could help if that's hard is that you give that emotion like a name, like a character. So, you know, if you have this really strong, resilient version of yourself, maybe you'll give them a name, you know, like Superman or Wonder Woman, something else. Could be, you know, Zen version of yourself. And just think about how would they handle this situation, you know. And if you can't managed to embody that feeling yourself just yet, try to imagine that character standing in front of you. Ask them, hey, what would you do right now? Okay, I'd love if you could type in the chat if that helped at all, if there was any particular emotion you were able to call to mind. It's a very short version of a longer meditation that you can do, but that's just to give you, a little idea of how you might summon that into life. Okay, so a morbid thing to say, but I think in this sort of situation, we should always hope things are going to get better, but also consider the possibility that things will get worse, right? So being realistic about it. And I think the more we can be honest about what we're feeling, the more we can handle these kind of things. So, just to give you an example, if I tell you, yeah, things might get worse, you might immediately feel resistance inside you, right? Fear, anger. So your reaction can be, no, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to think about that. But if you are able to go, okay, I'm feeling my heart rate increasing. Ooh, some noise out there. I'm feeling blood rush to my face, and you can tell yourself, I think, it's my flight or fight response. I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling upset. Maybe you can ask yourself, okay, why is that? Maybe you can do something that will help you feel calm. So, you can take some deep, deep breaths. You can, like I said, blur the focus of your eyes. You can maybe, try to get yourself into a more calm place to hear that. Breathe, through that emotion. So just sort of go, okay, things could get worse. Am I able to handle that? So one thing is that sometimes, we don't trust ourselves. We don't think that we would be able to handle these difficult situations, and that can cause a lot of the fear. But yeah, I think being compassionate with ourselves, understanding that you're not a superhuman, you have these emotions, you're trying your best, you're working with this like ancient software that evolved back in the Stone Age, and so it's not always going to react perfectly. Being patient with yourself. So yeah, one thing I do is called the work that reconnects. So this is like a method where we go through really difficult emotions around this journey. So we start with gratitude. We go into honoring our pain for the world, so really acknowledging the difficult emotions, and then we move forward, so we don't try to jump straight to feeling great. We look at what we're feeling, we feel it, we accept it first before we go forward. So the reason I'm mentioning that is, this is just a really small example of what I do. And actually this month I've been running a course called Staying Grounded in Times of Crisis. And it's a 30-day course where I send an email every day to the people on the course, and we also have a call every week, like a group call where you get to talk about how you're feeling, how the exercises affected you, what's going on in your life, and we go through a grounding meditation or two. And in this course, there's like loads more stuff. So emotional intelligence starts off as the backbone, but there's also a lot of stuff about the power of gratitude, self-compassion, honoring our pain. And then when I talk about seeing with new eyes, I mean trying to reframe situations and look at them a bit differently. So one thing can be, shifting your perspective. So recognizing that maybe you're feeling really scared right now, but if you look at it from a different perspective, maybe, you know, you can bring those other emotions in, like we just did, and you might be able to see different solutions pop up. You might see different things that you didn't recognize before. And we do a lot of writing exercises and, you know, guided visualizations, like lots of stuff like this. So it's been really great this month because the people I've been working with have all said it's been really helpful for them to deal with a lot of the stress during COVID. So I think, okay, thank you for joining. Yeah, we'll wrap up now. So that course, anyway, I'm running it again this month, starting in May. 10th of May is the plan now. So the first 5 people to sign up will get 50% off. So that's really nice. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, I'm gonna just send you a quick email after this, just in case you want to find out more about that course, which is here. So yeah, so thank you so much, everybody, for joining. It's been really nice to have people from such different places going on here as well. And I hope that you found something useful in here. So yeah, if you want to learn more about emotional intelligence as well, as I said, that book by Daniel Goleman is the sort of original book on EQ, but it's quite heavy. So I will also post a couple of links into the Facebook event that might be helpful. So yeah, just let me know. Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that you loved it. Yeah, so if you want to ask any questions now, if anyone wants to stay on and ask, feel free to unmute yourself for a second and go ahead. Or you can all just unmute yourselves and say bye. That would be fine. All right.
Thank you, Gwyneth. It was really, really nice and enjoyed it quite a lot. So yeah, I need to go now, but yeah, thank you for your patience and kindness also.
Thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to make it.
Yep.
All right, great.
Okay,
So,
bye-bye.
everybody. And yeah, stay in touch. I'll be doing more webinars in the future, I'm sure. Okay.
Thank you, Gwyneth.
Thank you. All right. So